everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. So in today's podcast episode, we're going to talk about facing the collective shadow with an open heart, which is really what we see happening, rising in the world, is just a bunch of material from the collective shadow. So before we get into it, I just wanted to make a quick reminder. We are taking applications for our next private online group coaching program, which is called Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening, which is a 12-week, it's now extended to 12 weeks program in psychological and spiritual self-work. So it really is an experiential group process that we're facilitating here. We've done it quite a few times now over the past year. We keep doing it because it's getting more and more powerful and more potent the more we do it. And we really just give people tools they need to connect to who they truly are, clear out trauma, regulate their nervous system, which is so crucial during these times, and just many esoteric self-work tools in order to really remember who you truly are and activate your deeper soul mission for being here. And we do go into shadow work, and it is quite a powerful group process to engage in collective shadow work in line with what we're talking about, which is partially inspired by some of the group experiences we had as well recently, owning our shadow in a group process, because this is really a small microcosm of what we hope to see ripple out into the world, is more, self-aware, heart-centered people who are here to really facilitate change and usher us into this new era. So we're going to be doing it this is going to be a fall/winter program. The next one starts on November 22nd till February 10th. It's by application only. And if you're interested, you can go to fill out an application at awakenapply.com. That is awakenapply.com. Also as well, Bernhard on his veilofreality.com website has a little quick description so you can find out more about that. So let's get right into it. It's funny because I know we've done podcasts on shadow work so many times, but it's almost like we're trying to really drill this home because it comes up for us actually as well.
Yeah, exactly. Shadow work, as I always said, is the name of the game. And I'm also putting the mirror on myself because to varying degrees, what I see in the world, because shadow work, even the term has become very popular as well, over the years, even the new age and pop spiritual psychological circles, everybody's talking about shadow work and whatnot. But I see also a lot of distortions, or not rather distortions, but maybe oversimplifications of shadow work, or maybe an intellectual understanding, but not truly owning it and integrating it and applying it, because it's easy to talk about triggers and projections when we're not triggered.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I'm putting the mirror on myself. It's really delicate. It's very hard right now in this day and age, as more darkness is coming out with the polarization, with the splitting of humanity, which we see in our personal lives collectively, right? To really stay in 0 point and not project our shadow outwardly onto the other side, so to speak, or onto others. Right. And I've seen it also it's so much easier always to point out externally what is wrong and see the evil externally and try to eradicate externally. But what I've realized also now is, I'm continuously working on my own shadow and integrating it in the process of individuation, which we also talked about in a recent podcast episode, is this continuing work, right? To really own these parts of yourself, which we usually only see externally. And many people say, what I've also noticed, and I've said this before, haven't we learned from history? What's happening now happened maybe in Eastern Germany, back in World War II, Nazi Germany, and all of that. And have we not learned from history? Have we not learned from history? And what I've realized really in light of shadow work, that just an intellectual understanding of history is not equals learning from history, right? Because the work is to be done within. And as long as we have not faced our darkness, our shadow, and also collectively as well, and really do the work, we will in mechanical, repetitive patterns, because whatever we do not confront within ourselves, our unconscious shadow, will play itself out externally as fate in the collective shadow, as even Carl Jung has said. Hence, we do not learn from history, not because we don't have an intellectual understanding of history, but we do not engage in the work.
Yeah. And also which we'll get into later, we probably don't learn from history because we're identifying with the victim and not the perpetrator. Exactly. And the perpetrator usually is the one who becomes the projection of the shadow. So we're going to begin by actually just defining the personal shadow and the collective shadow to give some context. So the personal shadow, I think David Rico, I think it's in his book on the shadow that he
Shadow Dance.
Yeah, that he has this quote. So the shadow is everything about ourselves that we do not know or refuse to know, both dark and light. It is the sum total of the positive and negative traits, feelings, beliefs, and potentials that we refuse to identify as our own. The shadow is a part of us that is incompatible with who we think we are or are supposed to be. It is the realm beyond our limits, the place where we are more than we seem. The shadow is ironically humorous because the opposite of our self-image proves to be true in spite of all our tricky attempts to not believe it or display it. Fear of that wider self keeps it in the dungeon. He means the unconscious, but there are ways to release that prisoner. It takes practice. The challenge is accepting ourselves all the way to the bottom, admitting and holding rather than denying and eschewing our arrogance, our self-centeredness, our will to coerce others, and any other dark truths we cannot face about ourselves. All of these constitute our negative shadow side, which can turn out to be not so much a threat as a promise. We can find the best in us based on what is bad in us. We shall see how the counterpart of every negative in the human equation is something positive. Everything is meant for good, says Saint Augustine, even what is bad. So that's just a description of the personal shadow. And the key thing is that it's what we do not know or refuse to know. So the more that we're like, oh, I would never be like that. I'm not this kind of person, but I see it in other people. That's a moment to actually check yourself, because I have to do it constantly. Actually, the more we talk about shadow work and go through shadow work in the course, the more I can actually escape it, because I'm constantly talking about it. I'm constantly leading the group through this process. And then I realize it's a really intense process to actually withdraw those projections and just really constantly look for your own evil persona within your own psyche. It's really humbling work. And it can be actually very heartbreaking, which is why compassion is such a necessary piece of doing that. So then we have this personal shadow, right? Any part of ourselves that we deny, repress, we exile it. We pretend that we would never be like that, usually because of cultural conditioning tells you that you need to be a certain way to get approval, attention, love. So we become this self-image of ourselves and repress anything that we think is unacceptable to the shadow.
And we only see it externally.
And then we end up projecting that part of ourselves unconsciously externally. And that's actually the way that our shadow makes itself known in spite of all of our attempts to suppress it, is through projection. So we have this personal shadow, right? And then we also have a collective shadow, and our personal shadow actually often will connect us to the collective shadow as well. So this is from actually some of the material in our course. Either you or I wrote this, or us together. Not only do we have you make conscious the shadow on a personal level, but it also shows up in collective themes and collective patterns. So each nation holds a shadow, each culture, each group can hold a collective shadow and collective unconscious within itself. The themes show up in culture of each time period, most apparently including the art, music, and any other forms of creative expression. The cultural trends within each country and group are an expression of archetypal themes expressed from the collective unconscious. If we look at the movies, music, art of mainstream Western culture, we can see more violence, more dull, vulgar, crude themes, more graphic sexuality than ever before. These themes hold clues to the intensity, density, and blackness of the shadow material that is arising from the collective unconscious within the modern world. In making the darkness conscious, we are also transmuting energies of this collective shadow, which is a mass effort of bringing all that is hidden in the shadows of humanity to light. And so just some examples of is this toxic feminine and toxic masculine dance, huge shadow material on both sides arising there. The left versus right, we'll talk about that later. But the point of understanding this is we actually have to first access the personal shadow before we can tune into the collective shadow with any degree of consciousness or clarity. Meaning, if you're just constantly noticing all the evil that you see in the world right now, and you're not actually looking for the manipulative, selfish aspect within yourself, the evil part of ourselves also manifests as ignorance, then we're not really doing this work, because it's very easy to do. And it really takes a turning around of the focus. Doesn't mean we can't notice things going on in the world and have our own points of view about it. But the more that we're disgusted, like repulsed, I've heard all of these words a lot lately from people, the more it points to unconscious shadow material.
Yeah, so that's really important to understand the interrelationship between personal shadow and collective shadow. So as Laura said, we need to face our personal shadow before we can even deal with the collective shadow, but I would also to note the interrelationship between the personal and the collective shadow. So the less we have faced, or people have faced their personal shadow, more suppressed it, the more it rises up in the collective shadow and externally.
Yeah.
And on that note, I know we've read already a lot of quotes, but it's really important. So I want to maybe read this other quote by Carl Gustav Jung, the man himself, who coined the word shadow and shadow work. So he says, the change of character brought about by the uprush of collective forces is amazing. A gentle and reasonable being can be transformed into a maniac of a savage beast. One is always inclined to lay the blame on external circumstances, but nothing could explode in us if it had not been there. As a matter of fact, we are constantly living on the edge of a volcano, and there is, so far as we know, no way of protecting ourselves from a possible outburst that will destroy everybody within reach. It is certainly a good thing to preach reason and common sense, but what if you have a lunatic asylum for an audience or a crowd in a collective frenzy? There's not much difference between them, because the madman and the mob are both moved by impersonal or overwhelming forces. Whenever contents of the collective unconscious become activated, they have a disturbing effect on the conscious mind, and contusion ensues. If the activation is due to the collapse of the individual's hopes and expectations, there's the danger that the collective unconscious may take a place of reality. This state would be pathological. If, on the other hand, the activation is the result of psychological processes in the unconscious of the people, the individual may feel threatened or at any rate disoriented, but the resultant state is not pathological, at least so far as the individual is concerned. Nevertheless, the mental state of the people as a whole might well be compared to psychosis. So that's we can see right now. Let's see, we talk generally about the collective conscious, some definitions, but let's look at it in concrete terms of the seeing right now, the pathology, for example, what we see right now with be it what called the COVID cult or the woke cult of people that have been overtaken by their own shadow and project externally, right? With the whole disgust, with their hate towards, for example, people who question the vaccine and all of that, right? Or don't buy into the official story and all of that. So here we see the shadow playing out to varying degrees, as well as, especially in, and also these leftist woke ideologies. Which is also literally all based on a lot of shadow projection and suppression. It's coming out neurotically like a psychosis, so to speak.
Yeah, I've been thinking also about like the woke left and their focus on, seeing racism everywhere. And I actually think there might be a divine intelligence to it, because there is a shadow to America that needs to be faced. The problem is they're identifying the shadow, part of the shadow of America, and then they're seeing it everywhere in themselves instead of recognizing, like this might be telling me something about my own nature rather than the institutions in America, which is clear projection.
Well, that's they're projecting their own racism externally.
Yes.
That's why it's so triggered. That's the irony. If you understand shadow work, is they are truly the racists.
And that's why it's scary, because they are encouraging segregation, which is segregation based on unconscious racism. But all that aside, we got to always we're going to work on this podcast by actually constantly checking ourselves on our own shadow projections as well, because this is coming up on both sides. So the more we're eager to point the finger out there, the more it actually points to the sign that our own personal shadow is being activated. Doesn't mean we can't notice things, doesn't mean we can't have certain beliefs, talk about them, etc., But this is the main polarization you see happening is this like the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated.
Yeah.
And that's and I see a lot of people, including myself, falling prey to this, you know. And actually I had a big wake up call recently, you know, being amongst kind of consensus people who I know don't share my beliefs and who probably have gotten the vax. They didn't ask me anything about whether I did. They weren't treating me any different, but I was expecting them to in my own mind, which proves that also I was buying into this division. You know, if I'm expecting the world to be a certain way, then I'm most likely also in some way or form going to unconsciously act out that belief in the world. So I want to also, you know, I know that it's different for some people, especially if you're living in a blue state right now. It's a very different experience than where we are, which is in Arizona, you know. But we have to also watch out for the media is trying to fan the flames of the division right now, and then it becomes this massive collective shadow dance between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, the woke and the not woke. And I'm not taking like a spiritual bypass or being like, let's just be neutral. Obviously, I have my own opinions about this, but I'm just saying to be aware of the emotional and psychic content which is being activated within you right now. Because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's why we've said this time and time again in our podcast. It's like the best time to engage in self-work because the shadow material, the projections, the triggers are out of this, like, you know, they're just insane right now. So we really want to just constantly check ourselves and notice how we try to make demons out of the outer world constantly, you know. And the reason I said facing the collective shadow with an open heart, because that really gives you the answer on how we need to do this, is we actually have to access compassion. And I'm not saying to practice blind compassion or to use as an excuse, but the only way that we can actually face a collective shadow right now is if we do it with an open heart towards what's coming up within ourselves and what we see in the outer world and how that's affecting us. Yeah,
well said. Yeah, exactly. It's not black and white, so that's what it comes down to. But I wanted to give it a little example of a classic example of shadow projection. In this case, of a vaxxed person onto unvaxxed people. And it is by this quote journalist, I don't know if it's a journalist still, Keith Olbermann, or is a political commentator. He used to have a political show. I actually liked him many, many years ago when I was also still more in my liberal phase, I guess. He was more grounded. But ever since Trump, he had one of the most extreme TDS ever, Trump derangement syndrome. He truly hates this guy. So there's already shadow projection happening. But he recently posted a selfie video, which I want to share when he got the booster shot, and listen to what he talks about, and then I'll comment on it. 1 second.
Time to stop coddling the people who won't get the shot. Booster shot. Mission accomplished. And it is time to stop coddling them, the ones who won't get the damn shot already. And our first step, you and I, is symbols, the language we use. We call these people vaccine hesitant, vaccine skeptics, anti-vax. We say they're protesting mandates and passports. They're making a personal choice. They're waiting for more information. They're making a medical decision. Bullshit! They're afraid. They're afraid to get vaccinated. Stop feeding their egos about what they're doing. Stop legitimizing it. Vaccine hesitant, they're afraid. Vaccine skeptics, they're afraid. Anti-vax, they're afraid. They're protesting mandates and passports. They're afraid. They're making a personal choice.
So then he goes on and on, like about, you know, saying how the unvaxxed are afraid. And, you know, you just can see it in his voice. First of all, he's extremely angry. There's always this anger, like very toxic anger, like almost hate and rage behind it. But this is a very classic example of shadow projection, because what he's really doing, he's projecting his own unacknowledged, unconscious fear onto the unvaxxed. And that's, we're seeing more and more. That's why a lot of people who promote the vaccine, you know, full on and without questioning and promote the mandate and the passport and become very aggressive about it, they're unconsciously afraid that they have done the wrong choice, actually. That's his own fear coming through of having done the wrong choice, his own guilt that he might have actually screwed up. And he's projecting his own shadow, unconscious fear onto the quote unquote vax hesitant, telling them that they are afraid.
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack there. Number one, if we get triggered by that, like for me, I can own my fear of death. I feel this pretty much every day. And so everyone has a fear. I think a lot of us actually do hold a fear of getting the vaccine because of the adverse side effects, because we don't want to ruin our health and our body. So he's right about that, So I can acknowledge that, but the voice that he uses and his delivery actually proves that there's shadow projection happening, which is a really important thing to note, because there can be times when people do project their shadow onto us where what they're saying is actually true, but it's a shadow projection. And that's why it's really important to have a level of discernment when you're engaging in it, rather than wanting to just point the finger back on him and be like, you're shadow projecting, I'm not afraid, because it's almost infectious, when people project their shadow. It isn't almost infectious. It is infectious. So when there's like someone talking shit about someone on Facebook, you notice how like a lot of other people will jump in and start talking shit too, basically. Yeah, it's not even a dance, because there's no one dancing on the opposite side. It's like, it's infectious. So we have to be aware of that. And like, any time that someone says anything towards us, it takes a certain level of attunement and understanding your own emotions and triggers to be like, is this upsetting to me? And if it is upsetting to me, why? And am I able to own that part of myself, Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that, like, it's very obvious he's demonstrating common shadow behaviors, like tendency to harshly judge others, calling others names, abusing power, playing the victim, etc., At the same time, I can notice in myself while listening to him that automatically there's this like part of me that wants to shadow project in return to him. And that's how I can tell.
Take him down, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's actually, because not even take him down, be like, I'm not afraid. You're afraid, you're just obviously projecting your shadow. And that now I can, and just made me have this aha moment, because the shadow is an archetypal energy, and archetypal energies are very powerful and they can take us over. And so it just made me realize, like there's an archetypal energy, the shadow dance going on between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. And I find myself hooking into it through my own personal shadow quite a lot. And even listening to him, But that voice that he made was such a perfect example of like knowing when your own shadow material is activated, like just even the childishness of it.
Yeah, that's like almost like inner child coming through, like, who knows, what his inner child actually needed a hug, and what child abuse or what trauma he has gone through, Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is we're dealing not with adults, but mostly with children in adult suits that just traumatized, and now it comes out, right? Neurotically.
Yeah. And we're all afraid. As human beings, we all hold the like fear in us. It's just a regular human emotion. Never mind going through this cycle together. I think there's a level of fear that's infecting pretty much almost everyone, because we don't know what is happening, Now,
I want to also point out what you just said is very important, because I hold the mirror on myself as well. This whole idea, it's nothing bad when you get triggered, or nothing bad when you project. Actually, projection is the function of your psyche. That's what we do, period. We're always projecting. It's just knowing how you do it and when you do it, and what's the purpose of projecting is to become wholesome, to learn about yourself. That's the feedback mechanism of reality.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can see myself also, I get triggered, and emotionally reactive, can easily feed into that, loose, so to speak, which also from an occult perspective, we can talk about later from the hyperdimensional perspective. That's where also these occult forces, entities tag into, feed off of. That's why, like you mentioned on Facebook, when people start gossiping, talk shit about a person and other people join in, it's a feeding frenzy. It's not even which other forces feed off of, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you feel better by talking quote unquote shit about another person. engaging in these projections from your own hurt and wounding, and I always remember that. I also know it myself, I really examined it within myself, because I've sometimes in the past talk shit, sometimes here and there as well, get upset about other people, get triggered, right? But it's always from the past, in the past when I did it more, because unconsciously or deep inside, I was just not happy with myself. Something was off in my life, anything.
Yeah.
And it would come out then, just making myself feel better by, digging a hole on another person, basically by talking shit about another person, right?
Yeah.
Or even nowadays when I sometimes, get upset, something's not right, if I don't own it, my psyche or myself automatically tries to find a target to project it on, right? In order to just have an outlet. That's why a lot of people sometimes that get upset, you meet on the street or even in everyday life, and they get triggered by you or something. It's actually not about you. It's just, it relates to what's going on in their lives in that present moment. So if you're truly content within yourself, not only content, happy, like superficially, but really connected to essence, to who you truly are, right? You do not get triggered. You don't waste your time and energy talking shit about other people, because you're busy with your own creative energy and what you're here to do.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the point of like striving towards, like doing shadow work, is striving towards wholeness rather than this idealized self-image that we have.
That's a key point.
And we tend to actually, like, even with myself, lately I've been going through some 12th house transits, for those who know astrology. So I just feel this intense withdrawing and going inwards, never mind all these retrograde planets as well. And it's intense. It's really intense. You're just kind of sitting in your own muck the moment that you withdraw these projections from the outer world. But I just realized as you were speaking, like it's not about our tendency to get triggered or project. But what's interesting about you and I, since we're constantly engaging in this work and our group coaching, it's like we call each other out a lot, and we have permission to do that most of the time.
Calling out meaning like just giving a mirror.
Yeah.
Right?
So like if I notice you're talking about someone and I'm like, okay, what could be your own shadow material that's arising there? And I do it in a way that's compassionate and curious. It can be very enlightening. And that's actually when the projection tends to dissolve. The moment we can really find the seed of the projection within ourselves, it releases a lot of that psychic energy, I notice. That's why it's really worth it to do this kind of work, because if we can use these projections we get from the outer world and this kind of shadow material that's arising from the collective unconscious, it's so freeing, and it's just, you really just become who you truly are through doing this process, and it's worth it. So I just want to actually give a quote by Carl Jung about withdrawing projections, because this is one of my favorite quotes of his, and I think about this a lot lately, and I think that if we all did this a little bit, it would really help what's going on in the intense polarization and division we see happening. So he says, if you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say that they do this or that, they are wrong and they must be fought against. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself, and if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved social problems of our day. And he wrote that in 1938. And that's what I think our own personal work is just to take a moment, maybe over this winter, withdraw some of the projections we see from the outer world and turn that energy inwards. We're going to be giving some reflection questions on how you can do that at the end of this call, but just on a basic level, think of something that you hate in the outer world, and have you seen that quality in yourself in the past, or maybe in the present? Do you judge yourself for having that quality? Has anyone ever called you that quality in the past? There's a real intelligence the moment you turn inwards. And I also have to say, I just realized as you were speaking, is like, maybe it's my Scorpio nature, but I just trust people who own their dark side so much more. Like automatically it facilitates intimacy for me. I'm like, okay, you can own your shit. That's amazing, you know? And that to me is where a real relationship can arise.
Yeah. Now, very well said. And also what you mentioned as well, very important to understand that shadow work is not about being perfect, right? It's not about not being triggered and always being nice and not having things affect us. It's about being wholesome, being whole, individuated, right? That accepting our quote dark side and the good side, and integrating the shadow also, by the way, doesn't mean acting it out. I see a lot of it also in pop, spiritual, new age circles, when, you know, indulge in your shadow and all of that. It's not about acting it out, right?
Yeah.
It's about owning it and integrating it, which is not mechanically acting it out. It's a huge difference. But I want to add to what you say, in light of shadow work. Okay, of course, also, before we can engage into shadow work, we need to understand what it is, how it works. Hence, we offer the course, for example, to dive deeper into the principles, because I still see a lot of people not understanding the principles and truly apply it. There's a lot of distortions, oversimplifications in the new age and whatnot, you know. But also, you don't necessarily need to go to our course. You can do it yourself. Right?
Just Google shadow work. There's going to be a few books.
I remember I started shadow work, like I had to confront myself when I heard about Carl Jung in the 90s, and I read tons of book on the shadow by himself, by others, by David Rico. I have a whole folder of shadow work, you know, like writing it down and all of that. But also there's another trap within that. I have also, when I first started out, intellectualized the process, right? So I had a good intellectual understanding of shadow work, and even fooled because of my strong intellect, understanding shadow work, understanding where it comes from, my childhood and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, my intellect reasoning that I fooled because I understand the reason of why I get triggered and whatnot, that I feel and moved on. No, but it was still stuck in my body. So the key point is also to process that somatically through your body.
Which is intense,
which is extremely intense. And we have some very powerful somatic meditations in our course, which has also like had profound effects on the participants. We guided them through. So what I'm just pointing out, you can learn it yourself. But as I said, there's only so much self-work you can do on your own. And you are blind to your shadows. That's why it's important to do this work with others, where others can mirror us back, aware of our blind spots, and not indulge in the shadow projection, which many of us, we do. I'm not, again, especially on social media and all of that, no matter what side you're on, the left projects on the right projects on the left, for example, in the political spectrum, you know?
Yeah.
So that's one thing to very important to understand. Another thing is also very key to understand. It's a huge red flag for me when somebody says, well, I've done already all the shadow work. I'm done and over. I've done shadow work for 20, 30 years. I'm done with it. I'm over with it. Claiming to be done and over with shadow work is equally claiming to be fully individuated, enlightened, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And you can also, quote unquote, waste a lot of time, you know, if you do not apply shadow work truly, but maybe in an intellectual way, you know, and maybe not fully sincerely. And even recently, I posted a clip from a podcast we had with Eve Lorgan. You know, it's followers of our work know her very well. She is also more into the fringe anomalous trauma. She's the author of A Dark Side of Cupid and The Love Bite. And in the second hour, we talked exactly about this, what she's experienced as well, these red flags of people, you know, especially in the spiritual circles, new age, fringe, or even the topics I bring up, of people looking for advanced knowledge. Advanced therapies, modalities, how to ascend to a 5D,
that's
get
a
rid of
spiritual
entities.
Ego shadow.
Exactly, you know, but not still doing the very basic core work of inner child work, shadow work is in particular, and all of that, right? Because sometimes, you know, even when people I apply for the course, they say, oh, this, you know, I've done this already. I'm pretty, you know, I don't think I need to work on this. It's a red flag for me already, because you're overestimating yourself. You're overestimating your level of being, because the work, as many masters have said, it's always the same work. It just becomes more refined and refined and refined.
Yeah.
Right? Because especially in a relationship, the shadow truly comes out. You know, it's so easy to avoid your shadow when you just isolate yourself and by yourself all the time.
Yeah.
When you're really in a conscious evolutionary relationship with both partners engaged in the work, that's when the shadow, we've seen this in our relationship. It's catapulting. It's like a catalyst.
Well, the shadow material comes up even if you're in a relationship where people aren't engaged in the
exactly.
work.
But when you engaged, it's more powerful to work on it, right?
Yeah, yes, like if you have someone who's also engaged in growth, it's so much better because they can check you know.
But that's what I mean.
And it's
like,
powerful because it's like, even with us, like, you can help me on my blind spots, especially because when the shadow takes over us, we really just want to be right. We just really want to be right about this person, No,
but it's a key point, because I've done so much shadow on my own, like, and I've thought a work through, but a lot of stuff then came flying into my face when we started our relationship.
Yeah.
That's when it gets really deeply triggered, right?
Yeah,
That's why you cannot do shadow work just by yourself.
Well, you can, I think.
To a degree.
I think you can definitely do it by yourself if you want to, and you're sincere in really wanting to own these parts of yourselves. But I think as the work gets more refined, like what I've noticed in the group process, like it's just crazy, the healing that comes up when you're in a group container and everyone's owning their own shadow projections. Like, it's just amazing. This is not something that you see in everyday life very often,
No, because there's magic that happens, especially in group. People have done group work before, in a sincere group, engaged in this work. There's magic happen because you also get out of the tunnel vision of your own stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which we can also narcissistically get involved our own stuff constantly and get overburdened with it. But if you do process of others, seeing what other people deal with and can even relate, it kind of triggers a deeper empathy and compassion, and more deeper healing occurs.
Yeah, and it's
for holding the space.
It's a very unique situation. I know it's ironic, but my own shadow gets triggered because I expect that, the kind of work that I do, the psycho-spiritual focus, I project that onto the world, wanting the world to be that way, and wanting the world to own their stuff and be vulnerable and like be connected with their body and emotions, And do I judge myself when I'm not having those moments in myself? Yes. So my own shadow material gets triggered with the world all the time. So it's interesting because it's almost like with the group, like, this is a very rare thing to be in a group container with people who are being like this. And that's why I treasure it so much. And that's why I can see the healing is happening on a multidimensional level when you're around people who do this, and even just noticing you, like, when I point out when your shadow is getting activated and things you're talking about and stuff you're experiencing, and then watching you own it and work through it, I'm like, whoa, this is magical. This is exactly how the world doesn't work, Yeah. So it's really powerful to do it with other people, because it's almost like this weird repair for us, because I think a lot of the suffering we experience suffering from getting old, dying, losing people we love, our bodies breaking down. We experience basic suffering in life, but then we add all this extra suffering on top of the suffering that is already part of the human experience. And the layers of suffering we deal with when we just constantly projecting our shit and causing harm to people in the outer world that we don't even know, complete strangers a lot of the time, is just like additional suffering. So it's like we take away some of the suffering that we see in the world by just taking responsibility for our own peace in it, and looking at like, America has this massive, massive shadow around materialism, narcissism, sexualization, sexual pathology, sociopathy. And instead of just pointing out what's wrong in that, looking for all these characteristics within ourselves, because the point is to ally with the shadow, to always carry that kind of like devil on your shoulder and be cognizant of it. Because if you don't, you suppress it to the unconscious, where it tends to wreak havoc in our lives.
That reminds me of, isn't there an expression in Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism about unnecessary suffering and real suffering? Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
I forget what it's called, but I think I heard it called it like suffering on top of suffering.
Exactly, because many of us, like, that's important. I want to note this out because Adyashanti talked about it, Gurdjieff as well. There's a lot of unnecessary suffering. We're addicted to suffering when we indulge in shadow projection.
Yes.
Right? Our triggers and all of that, and don't take ownership. Most of us suffer need unnecessarily, literally. And I remember Gurdjieff talked about this mechanical suffering. We suffer mechanically because we lack self-awareness. We don't understand the work. We project constantly.
Yeah.
Right? We're not aware of our own self-importance, narcissism, and see it only externally and whatnot.
Yes.
Our own entitlement and all of that. But what is important is what Gurdjieff called conscious suffering, meaning not acting on mechanically on our triggers, but keeping that reaction that that then ignites the alchemical fire within and creates friction, which is hard to hold because it's much more relieving, probably even a dopamine release if we project externally. It makes us, quote, feel good, right? There's a certain release to that if we project it externally. But for example, on that note, like what also recently came up in a group that was really beautiful, we see nowadays all these projections, like people like my ex is a narcissist, all these narcissists out there and all of that, selfish people. And definitely they're full on NPD, narcissistic personality disorders, psychopaths, sociopaths on a higher level. But ultimately is facing your own shadow and facing your own narcissism, because all of us, unless you're completely spiritualized, enlightened, are inherently narcissistic. Yes. Meaning we are first and foremost, if you're really honest with yourself, concerned for your own well-being.
Yeah. On
all levels. I can see it in myself. I'm not taking myself out of the equation, right? There's also the basic ego identification, right? Yeah. So that's yes, there needs to be healthy self-esteem and all of that and healthy self-confidence. But ultimately, once the biggest shadows most people are not acknowledge is your own narcissism. And then you project it externally on your partner. My partner is so narcissistic and this and that.
Yeah.
Right. But we had this one great process also within the group, and, someone realized like actually it was not the narcissism of their partner was actually related to their own unconscious, unacknowledged narcissism. So we need to also face our own selfishness. For example, I wrote an article 5 years ago now about Trump when he got into power, Donald Trump in the shadow of America. People are triggered by him, like, yes, because he has this extreme self-confidence, self-confident, and also some narcissistic qualities. Absolutely.
Yeah, because he's a Pluto and Leo person, by the way.
But you know what I mean? But people get triggered by it because it triggers their own unconscious narcissism, their own unconscious materialism. The shadow of America and all of that. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with it, but as long as you project it externally, like the socialist left is now tax the rich and all this nonsense. This is just all shadow projection. This is not going to resolve anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's really important. I was actually recently, just because I needed a break from the news, I got really into the whole true crime movement on Reddit and other forums, and I was just researching true crime cases and going deep down the rabbit hole there. And then at one point I was like, reading up traits of a narcissist sociopath. And for example, a quest for power, behaviors that seek love and admiration, wholly self-serving, acts as a producer, director of their show, entitlement. All of these are qualities which I hold within myself, and it's really important we look at that, because that's the point of doing the shadow work, is become conscious of this own side of you, develop a relationship with it, so that, because from the unconscious, it wreaks havoc in our lives. That's the issue with it, is if we're not willing to acknowledge these qualities within ourselves, then they get suppressed into the unconscious, and then they drive our lives from an unconscious place. And you see that everywhere, like, this selfie culture, oh my God, that we live in these days. Like, maybe I'm just speaking for women, but it's just men do the filters too, but it's very disturbing these days going on Instagram and seeing these faces, which are heavily filtered, not real people, and just this basic narcissism, which you've become accustomed to and has become the status quo. So we don't even know what real people look like anymore, because we're used to seeing these filtered versions of people. This has been going on for a while in the media, but now it's even blown up even worse. And now I even heard, this is crazy, that it's really common for plastic surgeons to, for clients of plastic surgeons to come in with their selfie filtered face, their Snapchat version of themselves or whatever they look like with all these filters on, to make themselves look like this AI generated image of themselves. And it's crazy. It's really disturbing to witness how we're just traumatizing ourselves in this deep way, because we have this distorted view on what a human being is. Again, relates to becoming this idealized self-image we have of ourselves,
Yeah, there's a huge shadow on that. On that note, that's a whole trigger topic. It's almost, I see this elephant in the living room, and at the, potential of triggering some of our listeners, but in light of shadow work, own your triggers, right? There's almost like, it's fascinating. It's an epidemic of this whole Botox shots. And I see it all over especially social media, and especially women getting young and younger in their 20s and 30s, injecting themselves with Botox shots to have these puffy lips, or stretch their skin.
I think I don't know if that's Botox. I think that's another thing though, but continue.
Oh, sorry. I'm just like, but whatever that is,
Yeah, the fillers. They're called fillers.
The fillers, and for me, like, it's so obvious, and it, that this is artificial. You can tell it's not natural.
Yeah.
But like you said, because women are so, that's their own shadow. This comes from wounding. Any form of surgical or Botox type of intrusion into your own body comes from either like your own insecurity on a very basic level, or basic trauma and childhood wounding. It's part of not really owning your body as you are, or severe, as you mentioned, social, cultural conditioning through the filters, Photoshop, and what they see in culture.
Yeah.
And then it's being denied, like, oh, just do it because if I feel better about it, feel good.
Yeah,
whatever the intellect, the wound itself reasons it with, right?
Yeah.
And, but also the shadow is also feeding off the admiration, or the attention
it's related to
of other people, especially opposite sex.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's such an interesting study, because it's become recently popular, especially with younger women, because it's like we have this idealized literal image of ourselves based off of this AI constructed version of what a perfect version of ourselves would look like. And then we're physically trying to become that idealized image. The same way that we identify with our idealized self-image of all the positive traits we have in our head, it's happening in a physical way now.
And it's pathology normalized.
And we don't even really, it'll be interesting to see in 100 years how this plays out, but we don't know what real people look like anymore. We don't know what a real 30 or 40-year-old, 50-year-old looks like anymore, because it's become so distorted. And then never mind the collective, the people who are influencing the collective are these celebrities who, by the norm, they have all of these surgeries and
that is definitely also America's shadow.
Yeah, that's America's shadow. The obsession with youth, with beauty, with materialism, and
with the physical body.
And the thing is it is really about not wanting to be real and not wanting to be whole.
Yes.
Right? Because we don't want to look like a real human being. We don't want to get gray hair and wrinkles and get old, That is actually an important part of the maturation process.
Yes.
That is being able to accept the basic suffering of life, not the extra suffering, but the basic suffering, getting old, dying, losing people you love, And when we do that gracefully, we get the gift of maturity. But we're trying to keep ourselves infantilized on this ideal kind of child image, be like, oh, you're perfect.
Yeah, but also that's a whole rabbit hole topic on itself. And that, again, may trigger a lot of people. But I also see women who engage in this cosmetic surgery, Botox, all of that extremely. It attracts, on a very core level, it activates, the opposite sex, lower animal nature, the lower vital attribute, just sexual basic attraction, basically on just superficial physicality, right? It's lower animal nature, it's lust, it's not, that's what activates the basic biological instinct. And that's, unfortunately, then women feed off of that because of their own wounding and insecurity.
Yeah. And I think that there's a big, you see it in the collective culture, in the music of these days, and even TV shows becoming more crass, more violent, more obscene, There's this real weird relationship that America has developed around beauty that's become part of the collective shadow. Maybe we'll have to get into the second hour,
Yeah.
But I have to say, okay, so turning the mirror on myself as well. I use makeup. I love makeup, actually, typical Libra, but at the same, and I can see as I'm getting older, even though I have the luck of Asian genes, I actually have to accept my own mortality. I actually did it kind of young. At 27, I was like, oh, I'm not going to be attractive very much longer. Yeah, that's how young it hit me, but I accepted my own mortality and was like, okay, so I'm not going to, even though I was super insecure in my most beautiful parts of my life, but I acknowledged, I was like, okay, so now I can't just glide by on looks anymore. There was a realization within myself.
Yeah.
And then I actually had to go through this deep process of understanding the true meaning of beauty, which is inner beauty. So if you have a sense of self-worth a sense of value in yourself. This is more the Taurus expression of beauty versus the Venus expression of, the Libra expression of beauty that radiates. You know, people who are just super classy and in themselves and embodied and mature, like this has nothing to do with their external image.
And it's extremely attractive.
Yes, it's super attractive. Yeah. It's the most attractive thing that you can have. So we have to also get into a deeper relationship with this concept of beauty. Again, this is this kind of like teaching function of the shadow, is that like through realizing and through accepting aging in my life, even though I'm sure a lot of people would be like, you're crazy, you still look young, you know, I had to accept my own mortality at a certain point in my life. And that actually, through accepting that, through grieving that, it sucked, you know, it just, because I was also used to people just being nice to me because of them liking how I looked or whatever, you know, it forced me to develop internally in a way which I was avoiding before. Mm-hmm. And so that is why, you know, we need to also look at the things we do to ourselves in order to try and fit this idealized self-image, because the important thing is if we turn that energy into it and ask ourselves, okay, like what am I here to learn about this? What is this telling me about myself? It can really force us in an important evolutionary process.
Yeah. And that's also not to denounce physical beauty, by the way. It's not about like going the other extreme, which like we see almost the purposeful de-beautifying of women, you know, it's which you see, for example, in the extreme left, almost like to like purposely look ugly, so to speak.
But I have to say, there was a period, even though I didn't do it in that extreme way, where I did that to myself, where I was just dressing very plain. I even wore fake glasses to like hide my face a little bit. And then I was just trying to see how the world responded to me if I wasn't trying to make myself look pretty. And it was extremely illuminating, you know, because it actually forced me to develop inner beauty and inner beautiful qualities. Yeah. It took a while, but that's what it forced me to do.
The key point is also taking your physical, you know, well-being, so to speak, and then it rates and your physical beauty. But beauty, as Shri Aurobindo would say, there's objective beauty, right? That doesn't come from the lower vital. Mm-hmm. So to speak. There's objective divine beauty which radiates from the inside out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know? Yeah. But the moment here's a reflection, that's a shadow, especially for the US. And I also can attest to that because I was a massage therapist, used to work professionally in Los Angeles for 15 years. And I've worked with high-end clients, even celebrities. I mean, like the women I worked on, 2/3 of the women had some sort of plastic surgery. And it didn't, you know, it was very weird because the face looked kind of like forced 30, but the rest of the body looked like 50. That was the real age, you know. So it just doesn't fit. It's not natural. But my point is, when you see as a woman, you know, that's where you apply the work, be it shadow work and all of that inner work. When you feel the drive, the need to like change your outer appearance forcefully through an intrusion, be it through injection, Botox, or anything. Reflect first of all, what's really going, where's it truly coming from?
Where is it coming from?
You know, why do you feel this way? What does it lead to? What does it remind you of? You know, and that's an opportunity for healing, for much deeper, because as long as you try to change the external superficially, it will never ever, you know, you may get more attention, more traction, but mostly more from the lower vital nature, but it will never ever heal that what you are basically running away from. Yeah. By trying to forcefully change your physical appearance.
Yeah, and it can come from a different place. And even thinking, I mean, we're touching a lot on this issue because it's actually a big shadow in America.
No, it's a big shadow.
And I notice it more and more, but it's all about our relationship to it as well. You know, you can wear makeup and do it from like the geishas, for instance. They're doing it from a place of wanting to show beauty, and you can do it from an extreme place of insecurity. So again, it all depends on where is it coming from within you, and are you like, America has such a weird relationship with beauty, whereas And women are doing this to each other too. That's the issue, is by buying into this culture that the celebrities have kind of like pushed on us and these beauty norms, we're actually creating a harder time for ourselves. So that's why I think it's really important that we have like people who are just naturally aging, accepting themselves who they are. Because the thing is beauty is the embodiment of soul qualities. It has nothing to do with what you're put on your face. Yeah. So the more that you're like that's, you know, you see it, and like think of like a beautiful elder indigenous woman who's totally in her power. You know, do you imagine someone with like plastic surgery or whatever. Do you imagine Paris Hilton dressed up as an indigenous woman? No, you can understand what that looks like,
More energetically, because we're just, distracted by looks. But, just bringing it down to it, like, we're going to end the first hour also with some reflective questions on this topic.
I would like to talk about those if that's possible.
Yeah. One second, no. But before we go into those, I also want to just, beyond this, the shadow we talked about right now here in the US regarding the beauty standard and all that. But regardless, the whole point of shadow work trigger is like one key ingredient we see necessary in the work. And with the people we go take on this journey with, but in general, the key opponent, and I've said this many times again, is sincerity. And all masters, teachers, even, psychologists have talked about it, spiritual masters as well. How sincere are you with yourself? Because I see a lot of people talking about the work, but not really engaging in it. And I'm putting the mirror on myself. How sincere am I with myself? Which means, how am I really facing the lies I'm telling myself? Why do I do what I do without justifying it, reasoning, or avoiding my own triggers and my own shadow? So it's this deep sincerity with oneself, the deep self-honesty that is necessary to cross the threshold. And that's not easy, because there will all kinds of defense mechanism will come up, all kinds of other forces coming in when you do from a cold perspective, distract you, tempt you away from the work. We've seen it time and time again. Even people sometimes sign up to the course, sometimes comes up and like they're being distracted, doesn't really want to engage in the work. There will be, that's divine law, right? There will be resistance from the egoic collective slumber, your own stuff coming up, stuff you've never looked at it, doesn't want to be revealed, your own ego. In all of that, this is all the resistance. That's why also in this work, besides sincerity, we also need to engage the will to really wanting to do it with 100% commitment. That's the attitude. If some people just like, I just want to, I'm curious about it, I want to check it out, and all of that, that's not enough. As Gurdjieff said, we need super efforts, and that's really important in this work, and it's very humbling at times.
Yeah, I think it really also, we really want to return to our true nature. There has to be a part of us that recognizes that what we're experiencing is not the whole of it. And there's so much more that we could be, and so much we would be living in such a different way. There's a basic recognition of the fact that we are living in samsara, and there's a huge removal from true nature that's happened, and wanting to return to that state. So I don't know where that comes from, but that's what I know guides me, is like, I know that there's more to life, and I know how dense it is also, especially these past couple years, but there's still that aspiration, you know?
And that's that's definitely I want to get into the second hour as well, because it's not just about shadow work alone, not just psychological work alone. It's otherwise you just end up digging in the mud all the time. That's why it needs to be matched with bringing down the divine, to aspire to the divine, bringing God into the picture, your true self essence. And that's why even the course, we combine that work. It's not psychological work, shadow work is necessary, it's a foundation, but it needs to be matched with spiritual work to bring in the divine, to a true surrender, a true aspiration with the same sincerity. And that's what we're truly longing for, even unconsciously.
Yeah. And I think, that's what helped me a lot in my path, even though I engaged in a lot of spiritual bypassing as well, is like there was a sincere desire to understand God. Like I was like, there's...
To know God.
To know God. And I had these, transcendental spiritual experiences and ceremony, meditation retreat. And I was just like, this is what I'm missing in everyday life. And then ironically, I noticed, these illuminating experiences are often followed or preceded by a descent into the shadow. So they're intimately intertwined. Yeah. I think in order to align with divine will, which is like really the will of God acting through us, we have to have gone through that transmutation process. Otherwise, it's typically what our idea of divine will is just driving us, which is basically our conditioning patterns, our ego expectations. Truly aligning with divine will is aligning with what God has in store with you. And in order to do that, we actually have to make this descent into the underworld. Exactly.
That's also the law of ascent and descent. It's not a way out.
So I'm going
to... as just close off before we go into the questions, as Carl Jung said, the tree that reaches to heaven needs to have its roots in hell.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So let's just add some reflection questions for people to think about, to give themselves food for thought, and stuff that I think about actually a lot recently. So what qualities do you see in humanity right now that's triggering for you? And if you say nothing, then think you are enlightened.
And also not only the trigger you see you, because we have noticed that people say, oh, this triggers me. And then they stop, but also inquire.
That's what I'm getting into.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sorry. There you go.
So what qualities do you see in humanity that trigger you right now? So for me, let me just give you an experiential version. Like this kind of intense othering and treating other people like vermin, that's what I see, And have you demonstrated this quality before in the past? Has anyone ever called you these qualities before? Or do you exercise these qualities still and judge yourself for it? And if no to any of these, could you imagine a situation where you could perceive yourself demonstrating these qualities? So in this part of the exercise, you're really looking for the seed of it within yourself. Have I ever treated people like crap? Yes, for sure. And I do judge myself for that. Even with myself, I see there's almost this like superiority that comes once you have more self-knowledge, and you constantly have to check this spiritual ego at the door because you want to, you think because you can perceive more, this makes you better than people, or the ego tries to attach to the things we learn. So yes, I have. We are trying to discover. So the point of this exercise is we're trying to discover what we see in the outer world has, in the very least in its potential, the capacity to arise within us. And that's how you basically do shadow work. And if you apply this and you feel into all the emotions and sensations that arise within you when you sit with this process, I can tell you it is incredibly transformative. It's humbling as heck. It's probably the most humbling thing, But this is also how we kind of ally with our shadow, is we recognize, okay, I have that capacity within me, and how can I actually work with that so that it's not operating unconsciously within me? Yeah. And if we do this with ourselves on a consistent basis during this time, I just want to thank you, because I truly feel that this is what contributes to the betterment of humanity and helps us work with the material that's arising from the collective unconscious right now.
Yeah, and for regular listeners or new listeners as well of the podcast, I talked to this as well to Paul Levy, a few podcasts ago. He's been on the show a couple of times. He's the author of Wetiko, the alien mind virus. There's the Native American concept of occult forces, but very much relates to shadow work as well. And I've talked to him about this as well, and he made the same point. To truly able to deal with the evil out there, you have to face your own evil and your capacity for your own evil. The reason why a lot of people don't understand what's really going on out there or cannot fathom the evil is because they're not in touch with their own dark side. And also, at the same extent, the more you only see evil out there and project it externally, and you don't see it within yourself, the more you keep going in circles and feed that timeline, so to speak, feel that frequency, because we're constantly externalizing, right? Hence, again, all these forces, all evil had is itself, as Paul Levy said, the seed, its own medicine, right? It's all the teaching function in light of the evolution of consciousness. So anyway, we'll go deeper into that in the second hour, where I also want to talk about the occult aspects of shadow projection in light of psychic attacks, and also the necessity to aspire to the divine and bring in the light beyond just digging in the mud, right? The law, the ascent and descent, and much, much more. Again, if you're not a member yet and want to have access to the second hour of these podcasts, go to my website, veilofreality.com, and sign up to the membership. And also a reminder, if you want to dive deeper into this work with Laura and myself, then feel free to apply to our upcoming 12-week intensive group coaching program, Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening. It starts November 22nd until February 10th. Over this, diving into deep to the end of this year and the start of the new year. So you can find that also at my website to find out more about the course and apply, or go straight to awakenapply.com. With that being said, see you guys on the other side. Thank you.